So demand is the relationship between price and the amount we are willing, so how much we desire something. And so it's the relationship between price and the amount we are willing and able to buy. So we have our preferences, that's our desire, the indifference curves or marginal utility, and then we have our ability, right? That's the budget line, our constraints. It is these two aspects, the willing and able, that change as you change the price. So we said in our previous videos that the demand curve is downward sloping. And we said it was downward sloping for two reasons, the income effect and the substitution effect. So we want to dive into the income effect and substitution effect. But in general, the idea is that when prices go down, if we buy the same number of goods that we did before, we'll have income left over. So we can afford more. Okay, so we've changed our ability to purchase the good or service. We also have preferences towards specific goods. And so when the price of one of those goods changes, we want to buy more of it, right? Because it's cheaper. So when there are two goods that are equivalent, we're going to buy whichever one is cheaper. So we essentially have the income effect and the substitution effect that are creating this downward sloping demand curve. So prices fall, we can put more of our income, or we can put our income goes further so we can get more. And as the price falls of a good relative to others, we'll get more of that cheaper item. So the substitution effect. So let's look at this in a bit more detail. So let's start first by talking about the income effect. Now, when the price of a good falls, has your actual paycheck changed? No. When the price falls, what changes is your real income. So real income is buying power, what you can get for your money. When the price of a good is less, your real income goes up. You can now get more. So, for example, let's assume that you have 20 bucks to spend for lunch today. Okay? And normally you go and you get a sandwich and a drink, and that costs 10 bucks. Okay? If the price of the sandwich falls, so now you can get a sandwich and a drink for $5, you could now, with your 20 bucks, afford more than one sandwich. Okay? So your money, your $20 that you have for lunch, now goes farther. You can get more for the same $10 out of the 20 that you did before. So when prices are lower, we now have income left over. We could get more. So we can get 2 sandwiches for 10 bucks instead of 1 sandwich for 10 bucks. So as the price falls, this means we're likely to get more because we are able to. Okay? It's not that your actual income has changed, it's that your buying power has changed. So to be clear about the change in real income, we recognize that there really are 2 things that can change real income. Your buying power changes if your actual income increases. So if you got more money, so instead of having $20 for lunch, you had $40 for lunch, your buying power has changed. You can get more sandwiches. The other way your buying power changes is if the price of the sandwich fell. So yes, both of these will change your buying power, what you can get for your money. But when prices fall, your actual income, that paycheck, or the 20 bucks you have for lunch, has not changed. We can also see this on our graphs that we've been looking at before. So here are the indifference curves and the budget lines from an earlier example, right? We had $300. We could buy $60 video games and $2 phone apps. Given our income and our preferences, we ended up at this optimal consumption point of 3 video games and 60 apps. Now, if there is a change in our actual income, okay, so if our income went from 300 to 600, we saw a change in our buying power. And we showed that previously by the fact that if we had $600, then we could spend it all on phone apps and get 300, or all on video games and get 10. And if we connect those dots, we found that optimal consumption point here, and we realized that when our actual income changed, so did our real income, because we were able to get more. Okay, our buying power increased. But what if there is no change to our income? Our actual income hasn't changed, but instead the price of one of the goods changes. So in this example we looked at before, what happens if the price of a video game is now $30 instead of $60? Well, if we spent all $300 on phone apps, we'd still be getting $150. But now if we spent all $300 on video games, because they're now half the price they were before, we can afford more. So we drew a new budget line, and we found a new optimal consumption point. So notice at that new optimal consumption point, we are able to get more. Our buying power has increased. So when prices fall, your real income, not your actual income, but your real income, your buying power has gone up. And we can see that because we are now on higher indifference curves. We are now willing and able to get more. So when we talk about a downward sloping demand curve, what we're doing is changing the price of one good, like you can see here, and noticing how we can now get more. In this case, video games, because we changed the price of video games. And that's based on what we're willing to buy, so here represented with indifference curves, and what we're able to buy, here represented with the budget line. So when prices drop, we have income left over. Our real income goes up, we can get more for our money, so we are likely to get more. The quantity goes up. The second reason we have a downward sloping demand curve is because we have substitutes. We have goods that we value equivalently. We talked before about perfect substitutes, two things that are the same in your mind. And we know that if we have perfect substitutes, which one do you buy? You buy whichever one is cheaper. Well, you may not have perfect substitutes, but you do have things that are similar, that are somewhat equivalent. So they may not be perfect substitutes, but they are substitutes. So when you think about one versus another, you still consider the price. And so if we have a choice between two products that we view as equivalent or somewhat equivalent, we're going to buy the cheaper one. So let's look at an example of this. All right, so we said that you had $20 to spend on lunch. $10 bought you a sandwich and a drink. Okay. Now, what happens if there is a change in price? Well, we said that, if the price of a sandwich fell, then we could now afford 2 sandwiches today for lunch. We might be willing to buy more. We're definitely able to buy more. Well, what if there is no change in your income? Okay. What if you go to get lunch today and that $10 sandwich is now $1,000? Well, you're not able to buy that sandwich anymore, right? The price went up. The amount that you were able to buy went down a lot, right? Now, what if today you checked the mail before you went to lunch and there was a check from your long lost uncle, $1,000 check. So you have an extra $1,000 when you go to get that sandwich and drink. So can you afford a $1,000 sandwich? Yeah. So you have $1,000, you could buy a $1,000 sandwich, but will you? Are you willing to buy a $1,000 sandwich? Well, probably you're going to say, I'm not spending $1,000 on a sandwich. I'm instead going to go get a hamburger that I can get for $10 and use the rest of my money, the rest of that $1,000, to do something fun. And so even though you can afford it, doesn't mean you're necessarily willing to buy it. So this is that substitution effect. When we have two goods that are somewhat equivalent, we're going to go with the cheaper one. So if the price goes down, then the amount that we're willing and able to buy goes up. If the price goes up, we're going to switch to a cheaper alternative. So in this case, the price of the sandwich went up to $1,000. So the quantity of sandwiches we were willing and able to buy went down. We were able to buy it, but we were less willing because we're going to switch to an alternative. So it is both the income effect and the substitution effect that create that downward sloping demand curve. Now, often in real life, we don't spend a whole lot of time drawing demand curves, okay? But we do see the law of demand present. So what you see here on this graph is not a demand curve. Demand curves show as you change price, what happens to the amount we are willing and able to buy. This shows time, and it shows sales volume. But it does show us the law of demand. So this is the iPhone, and in June 2007, an iPhone for $499 took 74 days to sell 1 million phones. In June 2009, they dropped the price of an iPhone to $199. Okay? It took 2 days to sell 1 million phones. The price went down. The amount that people were willing and able to buy went up. It changed because more people could now afford it at the lower price. And there was a preference for it, right? People wanted it. It was a cool or must-have item. Just a little more recent data, so that was 2009. In 2016, they sold, let's go back. 2015, they sold 13 million iPhones in 3 days. Okay. So what we're seeing as we look at these different periods is we can look at what is happening to the price and what is happening to the amount that people are willing and able to buy. If we look at the price of an iPhone today, right, in 2020, iPhones now are $1,500. What's happening to the amount of iPhones that are being sold? So we're a lot higher price. What's happening to the quantity demanded? Well, according to the demand curve, if it's now $1,500 instead of $199 or $499, there should be a lot less that we're willing and able to buy. But we also have to recognize that when it comes to iPhones, there is a change in our preference. So here we were holding the preference and our income constant and only changing the price. But as we have better technology, more features, that will change the amount we are willing and able to buy at every price level. So we're going to look at what changes demand in future videos.